Friends, you find yourselves once again with me in my backyard, because as I went to record my sermon, there was so much cheering, honking, yelling, celebrating, joyful noise outside the church that it was impossible to be in a spirit of contemplation. So you find yourselves once again home with me. Now, I want to start by saying that every time I hear this morning's scripture, I hear the old hymn. My life flows on in endless song, above earth's lamentations. I hear the real, though far off hymn, that hails a new creation. God, we need you this morning. So send your blessing on this meditation of mine and all of our meditations, that they might anchor us in our faith and send us forward with your vision, for you are our rock and in Jesus our Redeemer. Amen. In Bible study this week, Nancy shared a reflection, and that's actually where I'd like to start my own reflection this day.
One of the most moving experiences of my life was the Children's Museum at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. It is a circular museum separated from the rest of the main museum, and as you walk in, you are totally in the dark, except for beams of reflected light off mirrors. Each mirror represents the light and the life of a child that died during the Holocaust. As you walk around hanging onto a railing, because it is so dark in there, and the light is reflecting off around you, a voice overhead in monotone is calling out the name of the child and the age they were when they died. In its simplicity is its beauty. It is just one of the most moving places I have ever been.
Its simplicity is its beauty. 5 candles and infinite light. Nancy's reflection was prompted by our discussion of water, the river of the water of life. Water picks up the colors of what is around it. Muddy water coming down from the mountains, blue sky reflecting in the Caribbean. What is clear water? What would it look like? How would it shine? What would it be reflecting? Well, the light, that would have to be the reflection of our own lives, the light of God that we each carry, that was celebrated in that museum. The leaves, however, are what puzzle me the most, but also in some sense reassure me. Because if even in this new Eden there is need for healing, then this work to restore wholeness must be a fundamental piece of who we are, of creation itself. We are born to heal, to repair, to make whole. That in John's vision, at least, the project of each life, even at its best, is to reflect the one light and one another's light until we are magnified, amplified into a galaxy of lives, shining and multiplying and making whole. Even in paradise, there is work to do, and it is beautiful. Like the images and poems and songs that you heard in our passing of the peace, this image that Nancy offered up carried me through this week. It was a reminder that there has always been terrible, terrible darkness, but that there is always a light that shines in that darkness. The darkness does not overcome. But it wasn't until I was reading The Big Red Barn for the 30th time on Friday that I realized that not only does the light shine, but that same light asks us to fundamentally see the world differently. Let me clarify. My daughter Carolyn has reached the age where she wants the same book read 10 or 20 times in a row. We all know this stage, right? It's why the parents among us can easily finish this sentence. Good night, room. Good night, moon. Good night, cow jumping over the moon. Last week, her books were A is for Activist and Goodnight Gorilla. This week, it is Big Red Barn. over and over. And on what felt like the 30th reading, which was probably only the 15th, I started pointing out the non-obvious things like the balls and the doors. And on the second page, there's a drawing of the barn with a big and obvious window. Window, Carolyn, I pointed. Window. Pointing at it and then pointing to the window beside us. Window. Window. And she froze. She stood stock still, which is so rare. And then she pulled the book as close to her face as she could get it. Like most of us without our reading glasses. And then she looked at me, and she looked at the book and the window, and she pulled the book close to her face again, and we kept reading. But as we read, she continued to flip back to that second page, each time pointing to the window on the page and then to the window next to us. Now, at first, this image of her figuring out what a window was struck me because it was precisely what all of us have been doing this week, huddled over our phones or the paper or hunched next to the radio, trying to make sense of the map with all of its colors and lines. It also didn't help that the window in question sort of looked like Nevada. But then, of course, it struck me because it was precisely the opposite of what has been happening throughout this year for the rest of us. For Carolyn, until this moment, this book that she loved, well, she hadn't been able to tell that those two-dimensional objects were representational, that they meant anything. It was just chaotic and absorbing and maybe even beautiful, but it was as foreign and confusing as language itself. And it wasn't a depiction of or a commentary on her experience at all. It was colors and lines, sound and fury, signifying nothing. This past week, these past 8 months, well, the pictures and shapes of the things we thought we knew have been rendered unrecognizable, familiar certainly, but not the same. For some things, the parallel is undeniable. Worship is a two-dimensional picture on a screen. So is work. We order groceries online, and even coffee with a friend or dinner involves a distance, a literal mask between us. Like the big red barn, the book of our life has been pulled away from us. But even in the metaphoric sense, our daily routines have little of the same shape they once had. Our understanding of who our neighbor is, the shape and nature, even the existence of evil, the twisted, oppressive joists propping up our healthcare and economic policies, the blazing fires of climate change, what the ideals and values of our country are. And if you think those were settled on Saturday, I hope you reconsider what the color of our skin means. All of the patterns we thought we knew about how the world works, those things that have been reified since we were Carolyn's age, they have gone fuzzy. They have gone abstract. And here we are, moving the pieces back and forth, trying to make sense of them. This week has been one more week in a year of waiting. How could people vote this way, think this way, act this way? It is exhausting, this phase. It is why we have started to get short with one another, sent more grumpy emails than grateful ones. Why we've started to expect more when all of us can do nothing other than deliver less. This is why babies sleep all the time, learning so much, growing so much, figuring out the world. It takes every ounce of energy we have, and I know you are tired. I am tired. But this is actually the good news, not the election. There is still much to come from that, and healing work that will have to be done, and that must start with us. No, what I mean is that there is something profoundly beautiful in the unraveling. These events, they are once, maybe twice in a generation. And the only way we could really screw this up is by trying to force everything back into the old shapes and patterns, trying to make it look like it did before. When tyrants tremble in their fear and hear their death knell ringing, when friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? What we are experiencing right now absolutely can be a death knell for the ache and the pain, the structures and systems of oppression. That is what we must rejoice in and work for. But we must trust this process, not just the secular sacrament of voting, though that is clearly essential, but also this sacred process we are experiencing of deconstruction and reconstruction. Where do we want to be going? What vision is being put in front of us? How do we get there? Now, over the past few weeks, we have been talking at First Church about stewardship, not just about taking care of the church financially so it can take care of us spiritually, but also about our own stewardship. We have looked at how stewardship begins with an understanding of our own resources, monetary and personal. What do we bring to the table? And if you haven't filled out the time and talent survey yet, please do. Then we looked at tradition. What has been given to us that speaks to us of the eternal, that reminds us that our life flows on, part of the river of the water of life? What are the pieces of tradition that help us step into our place in the circle that is time? Today we talk about vision. Good stewardship involves knowing who you are and where you want to be going. It involves a sense that our gifts, all of our gifts, are being purposely put to work as a part of something larger than ourselves, that you are living your life in ways that helps create more of what you value. It isn't necessary to see the whole picture, not a crystal clear vision like John's, just the next step, and maybe the one after that. Now, to this end, deacons and trustees and I have pulled together a visioning task force to help us reflect upon and set out the different steps we each see, the visions we have for where God might be asking us to go, who God might be asking us to become in these next few years, to make sure we are good stewards together of you and all your gifts, all of us and all of our gifts. And in just a few moments, we are going to recite together the commissioning covenant of this group, joining with them to dream about what might be, how to continue to nurture children and youth in the values of love and diversity and cross-bearing service, how to bear the cross ourselves alongside our neighbors who suffer, how to embody love in a community that needs it, and how to do so with singing and gratitude, knowing that we have enough, that we are enough, and that we are never alone. Now, their work is going to take time. It is going to take participation from each and every single one of us. It is going to touch on some of the work that has been done before, but it must take us to deeper places. You see, in some ways, they are going to be asking us to stay in this place, this liminal in-between place, this dark place, where the shapes of familiar things are sometimes difficult to discern. Because this distortion of the familiar, it is essential to seeing more clearly where we want to go. Yes, this year has given voice to the darkness around us. The inadequate health care, or any social service really, for the Black and Indigenous communities, that cries out. The inadequate economic protections for those who are underemployed or unemployed, that cries out. The complete lack of structure for childcare, which places undue burden on women, well, that screams with the voices of toddlers on our Zoom calls. The encroachment into natural spaces, giving rise to pandemics and wildfires and floods, that's inescapable. But so too has this year made the light easier to see. The Black and brown and Indigenous people who are showing up over and over and over again to ask this country to live into the ideals we proclaim despite centuries of being told to sit down. The teachers who suddenly found themselves to be technology experts, mental health counselors, facility specialists, in addition to tending and caring for the sponge-like minds of our youth, the nurses and the doctors who have sat with us and held our hands because no one else could, and they wouldn't be anywhere else. The Republican and Democratic poll workers who have come together to say, trust us, trust this process. We are your neighbors and it is your voice we are striving to make heard. The lawyers who will adjudicate this faithfully to make sure the system does what it should. The incredible record turnout during a pandemic. When I remember this election, I will remember the dancing at the polls. This year has been full of lights, reflecting the one light in ways that are so dazzling they are almost blinding, which is why we miss them sometimes. But they call us to not be afraid of this time. Whatever the outcome, lean into this uncertainty, friends, although try to be kind to yourself and others as you do, because just over the horizon, I hear the real, though far-off sound that hails a new creation. Thanks be to God.